camera crew. So first, folks, let me first extend my sincere appreciation and thanks for everyone's patience. As you can see, we could probably stay all day with just one panelist alone. Lots to discuss. We are barely scratching the surface here. The next discussion is really going to be part of a scientific discussion. And so the two panelists you have here are experts in their own fields and recognized as a global leader in their particular expertise. So what I'd like to do first is introduce Ana Bray Estevez, founding partner at American Deep Tech, former SBA Innovation Advisor for Kaufman Fellow, and on the UAPDF Advisory Board. But what you may not know is that this Bray Estevez is deeply involved with the National Science Foundation. And that involvement really includes looking at pioneering new ways to invest American talent, scientific talent, into new and emerging areas of science. Right. Where do we decide to put our money and our effort in the next 20 years? Where do we get that return on investment? What does that look like? Right. And how do we force ourselves to think outside the box to be creative? Don't invent tomorrow's technology. Invent the technology after tomorrow. Okay? And it's that type of creative thinking that has traditionally kept this country ahead of everybody else. And I ask you to, when she speaks, listen to what she has to say, because this is, in my opinion, this is the future. Not just at this topic, but any topic requiring innovation. If you don't innovate, you stagnate. If you don't stagnate, you perish. That's just the bottom line, right? This is a competitive work. The next individual is a colleague and friend of mine, Mr. Mike Gold. Mr. Mike Gold is President of the Civil and International Space at Redwire, member of the NASA UAP Independent Study Team, former NASA Associate Administrator for Space Policy and Partnerships, former Acting Associate Administrator for the Office of International and Interagency Relations and Senior Advisor to the Administrator for International and Legal Affairs, former Vice President for Civil Space at Maxar Technologies, former Director of VC Operations and Business Group at Think Globe Aerospace. You might remember that word from somewhere else, and that involved them. And last but certainly not least, as a member of NASA, am I correct to say a mission manager with the Artemis team? Did I get that right? Because I've got two things wrong so far today, so I want to make sure you're right.
I'm a recovering attorney. They wouldn't let me close the Parliament missions. So I was the architect of the Artemis course, however, the global partnership of 54 countries, exploring new Mars and beyond.
Excellent. And that's it, right? Explore moon, Mars, and beyond. There is something for you to say. There was an estimate done that the future of mankind, our species, is not here. In fact, if you were to look at the financial opportunities, it was estimated that 1 times 10 to the 18th power amount of money is this world has ever made globally in all its time as modern civilization. Multiply that by a factor of 18, and that's the value of the resources that lie within the inner asteroid belt of resources. Oh, right. So the future is there. As a microbiologist and immunologist, there's one primary directive for all life systems, as you know, and that's to expand. If you don't expand, you will perish. In fact, you can look at a petri dish. If you put the right amount of nutrients, bacteria will do the same. Take a plant, give it nutrients and water, it will grow and take over. That is the primary directive of all life, and we are no exception to that. So keep that in mind as these individuals are going to talk to you about the importance of this topic, the UAP topic, and how it relates to the scientific community. Am I mistaken that you have your presentation for us? So I'd like to just turn it over. First of all, welcome our two guests, our esteemed guests. And ma'am, did you have a presentation? Or are you going to do the just questions and answers?
I'll go verbal, yeah.
Okay, very well. Mike, come on up and let's Let's get you started.
Thanks so much. Is it okay if I do it from here? Yeah, great. Chairwoman, until I do. In terms of expansion, I can tell you my doctor says I'm expanding far too much every day.
That's you too. Yeah, there's
A lot of trouble. Thank you so much, Blue, not only for today, but for all you have done to push this topic. You are an American hero, as well as the congressman and many others from this room. The journalists, the scientists, the advocates, pilots. It's just an honor to be here. I appreciate what everyone has done. Also, thank you, Rep. Board of Directors, for letting me out of the meeting early. That was a wonderful discussion. I think this is going to be a lot more exciting. If I could point you to my opening slide, that is actually an image taken by the Blue Ghost lunar lander with Redwire Argus cameras. I'm going to get in why that is such an extraordinary image in a moment. But before we get there, we were having a discussion about substances and what these new substances would like, new materials, what this UAP technology would be. And I've been getting the challenging about an end of the task of saying, how could UAP technology impact innovation without knowing quite what that UAP technology is, even fundamentally? So what I'd like to try and do today is give you an example of how microgravity is impacted innovation in really almost every industrial field and how that could be transformative. I don't know if extraterrestrial civilizations are using this. I think they likely would be, but I think this is an example of how a fundamental shift in technology could change everything. Our company, Redwire, has been conducting experiments on the International Space Station on the space shuttle for literally decades. We have flown hundreds of experiments over the past 35 plus years. We have 11 experiments active on the International Space Station right now, more than any other company. You see Senator John Berlin running one of our experiments there. The first one I'd like to show you is the Biofabrication Facility, BFF. We're great at acronyms at Redwire. If you could play video, please. This is, by the way, an over 400-pound payload at Brook Table in our facility in Greenville, Indiana. Much easier to handle in orbit. That astronaut, a Cubs fan, working very quickly, like coffee, at 20 times speed, but he's installing what is a biofabrication unit. And that system has allowed us to manufacture human tissue in space. It resulted in the first human meniscus being printed in space. Who needs a meniscus? I have no idea. You probably use two. Yeah, right. Exactly. This is the impact of microgravity. If you tried to create that meniscus on Earth, I think I have a recovering attorney, so I can put it simply, it squishes. You couldn't do that in gravity environment. It's not space per se. It's the lack of gravity that allows you to do these incredible things. Subsequent to the success we had with the meniscus, we printed live cardiovascular tissue. And we brought it back from the International Space Station, still alive. Think what this could mean for people suffering from heart disease, the creation of heart patches. And of course, the goal of all of this is ultimately to create whole organs in space. How many of us have had friends and relatives die while waiting on an organ donation? Look, this could change all of that. Additionally, because we would be using your own stem cells to create the tissue, the organs, we would avoid the dangerous and expensive anti-rejection therapies that you go through. So we see how microgravity can have a dramatic impact in terms of life sciences. Also, pharmaceuticals. Redwire has flown 28 pillboxes. These are systems where we take pharmaceutical drugs, fly the seed crystals. And seed crystals, by the way, they're like sourdough starting kit. They're what the drugs are made out of. And when you create seed crystals in microgravity, they're larger, more uniform, and that results in drugs with better efficacy, better longevity, fewer side effects. Here's an example that is very near and dear to my heart, insulin. We partnered with Eli Lilly. We flew insulin. Over on the left side of that, that's what insulin seed crystals look like when you create them on Earth. Over on the right side, that's what insulin looks like in space, the seed crystals. Again, I got P- in biology as a high school student. Even I can tell the difference between one and the other. And because of those larger, more beautiful crystals, Duke had a version of insulin. We've seen versions of cancer treatment drugs that, whereas you have to go from chemotherapy that will be injected, again, long, painful, you could potentially get to a version of the drug where it could be administered orally. So a tremendous difference here relative to the pharmaceutical sector. And by the way, it's not just us here, Elvis, it's China. And the Chinese have their space station. They're going after the same research. So every time Congressman Biden will look at the International Space Station, replacing it with commercial space station, this revolution with biotech and microgravity is going to happen. The only question, is it going to happen here in America, the free world, or is it going to be happening in China? And I do not want to be buying my next generation pharmaceuticals, drugs from the Chinese. So we need to continue to support this and to create new developments. But this is just life sciences of biotech. You get micrograv, low-packed semiconductors, the same principles. When you throw crystals in space, you can create new types of semiconductors that are more powerful, more tolerant of heat. Agriculture, you can create seeds, new types of plants that can flourish in the desert. We have a greenhouse that we're flying in space, looking at many of that efforts. You see that there. We also have systems with what's called Z-LAN fiber, whereas new type fiber optic that can be incredibly more powerful. Again, at every aspect of our technological society could be changed by this innovation. Is this something that UAP are using? Is this new substances that they're using? I don't know. Perhaps. But you see how this field will revolutionize everything. And I believe in the future, the leaders in microgravity will not only be the leaders in economics, but in national security as well. As a matter of fact, that meniscus sprint, the customer for that was the Uniformed Services University. His number one injury to our men and women in uniform are meniscus tears. Now I'd like to talk about who wants to see some unclassified data, right? Let's talk about some imagery that we're getting from NASA. As Lou mentioned, I was proud to be a member of NASA's UAP Independent Study Team. We had some very common sense recommendations, one of which that I testified here in the House not too long ago, alongside of Greg Elizondo and others, was that we need to go into the NASA archives, get the imagery, review it, make it public, and look at what we've got. This is an example that hit the internet not too long ago. Is it Tic Tac? It's on Mars? I don't know. I'm not qualified to say, but someone should be looking at it, or we should be collecting and collating the data. Here's one that's even more interesting to me. Lunar horizon glow. This is a phenomena that we first saw with the surveyor systems. This is a glow that we're seeing on the horizon of the moon. We saw it with the robotic surveyors, and what you see in the overlapping side are sketches that Apollo astronauts made of this phenomenon. A glowing dome, streaks of light shooting out from the lunar surface, pretty extraordinary. And then, most recently, this was my cover slide, with the Blue Ghost system, which is NASA's commercial lunar payload services, the Eclipse, a wonderful public-private partnership to reach the moon. With the Redwire Argus cameras, we took this image of the lunar horizon glow. What you might hear if you go on a NASA website or talk to some in the scientific community is that this effect is from dust that has been electrostatically charged and then levitated to create this index. Now, again, I'm not saying one way or the other, but Dr. should go back to get him credit. Dr. Manishet's, I'm gonna mess up his name. I apologize. It's in the slides. But a wonderful professor who's been associated with the UAP Disclosure Fund and doing work on this topic, finally in these slides. And I can tell you, NASA's own research, LADI, other systems, is putting some big question marks as to even if there is enough dust to create this effect, which looks unlikely, and that if dust could be electrostatically charged to cause what looks like a second sunrise. And that's not the sun, by the way. It's below the horizon. That is an extraordinary image. And by the way, when I first saw this picture, it was like, is that Algae on the moon? And what you're seeing is light refraction occurring due to, I don't know what. So I don't know what this is. Is it a dome? Is it some type of natural phenomenon that we don't understand or aren't aware of? Or I'll tell you, definitely, it's a unidentified, anomalous phenomenon. which bears nothing and bears understanding. And this is a good example, too, of even if it's a natural or prosaic phenomenon, there's something extraordinary occurring here. We should be dealt into it. We should be studying it and understanding it. And on the off chance that does turn out to be something extraordinary, I mean, we need to know what is occurring here. Additionally, here's another shot, publicly available from the NASA archives. You've seen some imagery of the triangular UAVs in the past? What's that? Debris? Satellites?
That's for the noon, right? What? That's Apollo 17. We had that picture. Images from Apollo 17.
A few of us saw something like that last Friday.
Yeah. Extraordinary. Sables, debris, clouds. What is it? I don't know. Luke, do you know? Armistead, you know what that is?
Why are we not investigators? And what it would ask of our brave members of Congress would here is, again, with relatively little effort and money, we should be leveraging AI and ML to go into the NASA archives. So much of this has been digitized, more every day, and conduct a review of what's possibly available on UAP. We spend so much time here, justifiably so, talking about classified material, what's being hidden. Yet there is a treasure trove of data that, if not a smoking gun, certainly is fascinating and worth looking at and applying the scientific method to. And these images that you're seeing here, and here's more of another UAP from Paul, or more of potentially Stonehenge, strange structures on the moon, lunar anomalies that look like Buddhist temples. I'm not saying necessarily all of these have extraordinary explanations. Maybe some of them don't, or maybe some of them do. But it certainly is worth the effort to investigate. And we're not doing that right now. Why? Because of the stigma, this pernicious stigma that prevents us from tapping it. And sir, that's where we really need their help. I have many friends at NASA. They're interested in this topic, fascinated by it, want to delve into it, but they need top cover. And that's why I was so grateful to be on talk more about what we could do. Either view the NASA administrator coming in, and this isn't going to cost a lot of money. This could be done with very little time, very little effort. Get the results. Could be extraordinary. Finally, as we get back to technology, I just wanted to level set relative to what it takes to travel in space. 3 days to the moon, 7 to 10 months to Mars. I can tell you explosion and radiation during that trip. Quite dangerous and challenging. 77,000 years to Proxima Centauri, our closest star. I mean, that's worse than my flights on United. I mean, that's rough. And then 1.7 million years to get to where we've seen some biosignatures first time. We're truly going to explore space. We're going to need some innovative technology. And here we already spent some time discussing the Alcubierre warp drive. This was a Mexican physicist. He did the initial work proving that within demonstrated science, and I would defer to Eric Davis here, but this is not extraordinary science, that the warp drive could exist. The challenge with Alcubierre's warp drive is that it would require roughly the mass of Jupiter converted into energy to operate. I mean, I had a Chevy Suburban, and that was not fuel efficient. This would be even more difficult. But scientists at NASA, what was then NASA's Eagle Works, tweaked basically the architecture of the Alcubierre warp drive, and perhaps found some ways to get that down to more the mass of the VW, something that we could work with. So these are the kinds of technologies that if there is a gravitic system or some kind of extraordinary technology, we must have it in order to reverse those distances and have America and our international partners lead in space exploration. Additionally, energy. I mean, if we are sitting on extraordinary technology, 0-point energy, the Casimir effect, as we discussed, think of the good we could do in terms of saving the environment, improving the economy, creating a post-scarcity society. It would be extraordinary. It would be wonderful. And let me just end by saying the reverse of that is we do not want to fall behind China relative to leveraging extraordinary technology. I don't know if there's alien tech out there. There may be, there might not be, but can we risk falling behind the Chinese and reverse engineer it if there is such technology? And this is again that the stigma is so pernicious that I'm sure China has its top officials working on this 24/7, coordinated, whereas us, separated, is compartmentalized, is MIT working on it, is Caltech working on it? No. We cannot risk losing communist China because we can't take this issue serious. We must not let a lack of vision turn into a lack of freedom. Thank you.
All right, well, for the brief presentation, folks, again, time's of the essence, so I'm going to make these as succinct as possible. If I, that is all.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love you to present that. And I was got just questions actually about that. So please have the floor.
Well, I just wanted to say, I really appreciate all the work you've done in microgravity, and certainly for, any of these craft that are above, that are in space above the 1 kilometer, they have that access to microgravity should they choose to use it. At our firm, American Deep Tech, we're very focused on a number of areas of deep technology, including space tech, energy, and advanced flight, including one of our co-founders, Kat with Aspera. They believe they identified a cancer kill switch, and I know you worked. Yeah, they were talking with her. Yeah, it's a cancer kill switch in microgravity. So just, for pharmaceuticals that access to microgravity, you see the aging within 9 days that it didn't take a year terrestrially for a tumor. So that ability to speed up that iteration on drug development is very important. So we've got some really interesting people that we work with, a CTO coming out of NASA, a branch chief coming out of Space Force, some very high growth entrepreneurs. And we also work with some leaders, as our advisors and venture partners in the UAP space, because we see the keys, of these areas of technology to drive that abundance, that competitive advantage, and just societal benefits. So people like we're fortunate to have as our advisor Hal Kuta, and also to work with people like Julia Mossbridge and Ryan Graves and Diane Finkhausen. So I know that they are active in so many areas of technology, but also in UAP. And so how did we come, in my former roles, which I thank you so much for that kind introduction, which I've completed my roles in the U.S. government, where I was the co-chair alongside NASA of the U.S. Space Economy Interagency Working Group. We work with exceptional innovation forward, UAP forward, and open leaders across the interagency. And those meetings are public. They're available online, U.S. Space Disruptors Day. And that was a day of about, 10, sometimes 12 hours of presentations on in-space biotechnology, in-space semiconductors, U.S. launch, also UAP, also advanced consciousness, AI, communications, and satellites. So there was actually interagency leadership that co-hosted this UAP leading content from NASA, Space Force, DRE, DHHS, Air Force. These were all very senior people, NSF and SBA. So while I would say that in years past, before this great movement towards transparency, gratitude for those in the room who have really led that, since the 2017 timeframe and before, time has changed. And innovation is not about, unfortunately, because we want everybody to come along. We appreciate, it's great once you get beyond 50%. Innovation and science are not about consensus. This isn't, we don't wait to get to 51%. This is the leaders are doing this. The fast followers are also doing this. And the reasons why they're doing this is because they're sitting in rooms, groups of people. We had an extended electrodynamics group of leaders from across the interagency and also the private sector, and they were working on advanced energy. They were working on advanced communications. There are funded entrepreneurs. At full NSF public awards, we funded and I funded companies working on what the entrepreneurs later described as UAP adjacent or UAP inspired technologies. One of those actually, multiple of those people have spoken, having worked on programs that they can't go into great depth about, but certainly others are undertaking that private sector research where it's not about it being classified first. And this, but the point on how do you get your communications back and forth to marks, without dealing with the 40-minute latency? How do you do that? And what are the approaches for breaking those barriers? How do you achieve this energy abundance and that more efficient launch capability? So it was these conversations on what could be achieved and what's already been in some cases declassified in terms of work and outcomes, or was never classified, really led to conversations where we invited in experts who then said, do you want my extended electrodynamics presentation, or you want my UAP presentation? We said, we'd like both of those. And so what that led to was receiving that tremendous presentation from Hal, from Charles Chase, and from others, and saying, actually, can you give this to more people? And so they gave those types of presentations to hundreds of people. And what we found with those entrepreneurs was this was the highest level of engagement we ever got in any field of science or technology. I'm seeing people in the audience who are part of it shaking their heads yes. So the entrepreneurs were so eager, and scientists, to engage in the UAP science and technology. And as a frame of reference, when we talk about disruptive technology, I've worked with a few of them because I've had the opportunity to fund around 400 companies, to work with thousands of entrepreneurs. Those companies, from just a quarter billion plus put out, have gone on to raise $8.5 billion in follow-on financing and $17.5 billion in total market cap just in the early years. That's coming out of a place that the program, which is not the UAP program, but a program that has catalyzed well over $350 billion, from well less than 20, probably 12 billion put out over several decades. So these entrepreneurs, oftentimes these highest growth ones, regardless of what they're working in, it can be batteries, they're told, never going to work. You will have batteries, right? People will say a higher performing battery, here's why it's not going to work. So these entrepreneurs are used to being told no and why not, and they still build things. And what's happening today, not just in America, but around the world, because the first time I saw these experiences was overseas, is people are seeing ultra advanced craft that are higher performing. And for people that are building the highest performing craft and the highest performing energy, they are not trying to unsee what they have seen, and that they caught on a wide range of sensors. There's the classified sensors, and then there's the sensors like this. We have imagery, on our phones from going out and seeing things. So I think that the impetus to build things is what's driving this. And what would be the right levels to really go after this? This is something that a few of us have spoken about, but my background's also as a strategist. So we do a lot of strategy now. And I used to be at BCG. And the question of, if you're building the highest performing systems, what type of resources would you put in place? So if we look at, I'm sharing kind of casually Googled numbers so we can get to better definition. But how much money went into the ISS, our long-term in-space laboratory? Some of the numbers online made that it was well over 70 billion for the U.S. part of that, and that with other nations' contributions, it might be 150 billion. What was the cost of the Apollo program? That was 26 billion, from the 60s to the 70s. Some estimates put that at inflation adjusted well over 200, perhaps $250 billion. So if you were to ask me today, what is the right amount of money to be investing in these ultra high performing technologies, these Manhattan style projects, it's well into the hundreds of billions of dollars. That's the right answer today. Whether the U.S. makes that investment or whether somebody else does, we are talking about advantage for multi-trillion-dollar markets. So some would say perhaps we made the right investments over time, that we've invested those tens of billions, those hundreds of billions. And if we have, how do we celebrate the accomplishments that might come out of those programs? How do we give the recognition to those scientists, those people who have served, who perhaps have not been able to speak about their work? How do we derive value from that? How do we say these pieces that might have been constrained because you didn't have access to the tools everybody else has access to on the outside and the collaboration, how can we bring the pieces in a way that is respectful to national security and increases resilience and abundance? And I am concerned, I mean, I appreciate it. I think many of us want transparency, but also how do we make that so people who may have worked in this want to come forward? You know, so if we're offering them, oh, you built something, you give your resources, and here's some punishment, that's going to be hard to get the technology out. How, you know, and there's lots of ways that that could be brought fully court. It could be anonymized into a centralized clearinghouse. If there's valuable technology there that can help people in the United States and around the world, let's celebrate what's been built and let's build the gaps that are there. So we see tremendous opportunity. The race is on. Some would say those are exceptionally large programs. Many of us have seen this wide range of phenomena, be they craft, be they orbs. The reason it matters, so sometimes the first time you see this phenomena, it's a point of interest, and you say, wow, you know, I kind of thought there was light bulb planet, whether it's light bulb planet or advanced terrestrial technology, but you think, well, okay, interesting, now back to our day-to-day. What do we do with this? And so a number of us came to, because our core roles were advanced energy, advanced computation, advanced biology, the answer was people who are working in their core fields of biotechnology, quantum, that they're seeing some of the potential paths forward through this UAP adjacent technology. Can we classify it today? I don't know how. I mean, there are parts that we can say stay away from this due to this risk, but the challenge on some of this is if you're to say, well, classify UAP technology, you just got to stop working on it. For people that are familiar with the science and the technology, there are elements of this that are relevant to quantum and quantum entanglement. So what does that mean for our national posture on quantum? AI is interwoven with this. You talk about microgravity and advanced materials. So do we just not do certain layering or advancement of certain materials because they've been found in a crash retrieval? We're not able to walk back because this is so interwoven. So saying that UAP is off limits, that's like saying, let's go home. Let's, you know, maybe, can we still use fire? You know, maybe Navy, you know, let's look into it. You know, can you still use rocks? So many of the fields of technology would be off limits. So honestly, we don't know how to you know, this idea, once you're in that, you don't even know, it's like saying stop using math. So the entrepreneurs are getting inspired, they're seeing things. And so this is kind of humorous to scientists. So we both appreciate that people are talking about crash retrievals and reverse engineering. Are there crash retrievals? Well, are there crashes? I mean, there's deer retrievals where I live. I mean, a crash seems a lot more interesting than a deer to pick up. And anybody who knows an engineer says the first time you see anything of interest, you are certainly going to reverse engineer it. So whether that happens inside government programs or whether it happens out of the streets, Americans and people around the world are seeing this phenomena, and those that build things are saying, you know, what do we build together? So we've seen these on a number of occasions. We brought some high-ranking scientists down to folks who are able, in spots where these show up more frequently. And it's worth noting that there are people, a number of groups of people who are currently pulling in or attracting craft, you know, and other phenomena. And some people just happen to see them. I'm looking around at Era, and you saw a lot of these. But so there are people that see these infrequently. There are people who have seen these on a day-to-day basis. When we've spoken with scientists, you know, over the past year or two, and so this is coming out of places that some would see as the scientific establishment, and Ken can we talk about this? Can we not? You know, it's all these conversations hadn't taken place as openly. When they did, what we found was, when we go into rooms and we talk with people who are innovators, it's usually 30 to 50% of people will share that they've seen or experienced an anomalous phenomenon. You know, sometimes I say, oh no, I hadn't seen a UAP. And then they say, well, you know, I did see this orb over a football field and, you know, it was huge. And then, so people have seen things, and we had to have the conversation with leaders in science where we said, by the way, times have changed. There's all this great work that's been done towards disclosure. And when we started talking to people about it, where we might have thought it was 1 in 20 or 1 in 100, seems like it's more like 1 in 3 or 2 in 3 or maybe 3 in 3 and 3 people are talking about it. And so we've had the conversation, which is, it is not credible or viable to act like this isn't going on. So it's a little, we use the analogy that it's a little bit like whale watching. It's both normal if you live by the coast, Holding, certainly. But if you live by the coast, and you have access to get out of the water, you know, there's a percentage of people who would have seen whales. There's a percentage who haven't. It's normal both ways. So nothing to feel like, you know, special or not special, you know, regardless. But it's ubiquitous. So if you can't go in front of a room of people, you know, if you've seen that and it's credible, and if you hadn't seen it, we say, listen, people are saying this, they know. So to be credible, you do need to acknowledge it's out there. There's so much data. There's so much people have on their iPhones. You know, there's so many people who will speak to the programs on the high side they're in, but the low side, you know, is not waiting for agreement. They're not, the Fortune 1, the US government can lead this. We can try to figure out what benefit we have from the great work people in this country and perhaps around the world have done, or people are ready to move forward. And when I was in government, I used to receive proposals, without going into the details on any of them, you know, in various fields of technology. People think they're the only ones who are going to say, no, any idea you have, believe me, dozens of people were working at the same time. So this is something that right now, both in this country or around the world, there are so many people that are eager to build this, and a number of them are already building these things out. So just because you don't see it doesn't mean that it isn't happening all over the place, both in this country and abroad. So if we need to lead, if we want to lead, we need to be active. So I'm looking, we always listen with respect to innovators and entrepreneurs, and I want to thank so many of you for sharing what you've seen. There is an opportunity. I expect more scientists are going to be engaging directly with the phenomena. And as scientists, they're going to be doing experiments and methods. Okay, so you want to talk about something that people talk even less about than UAPs. So the thing that was even more of a third rail than UAPs is the sources and methods for some of this. So as you're hearing about, there's a number of teams that are working calling this phenomena, and they're talking about all these different things. Some of them have these, ultra exotic protocols. And then one of the groups that we went to visit with some scientists, their protocol was prayer. And it was not some exotic thing. It was the Our Father, the Hail Mary, conversation. And I'm not trying to constrain it to any denomination or any faith or like thereof, because I think one of the hesitancies people have is they want this to be for everybody and not to be specific or linked to one thing. But source of the methods, when we're talking science, there are people through meditation or very, day-by-day prayer are calling in these crafts, and these orbs. So it's science. Let's talk about what it is and then assess it.
Open.
So my first question actually is to you, Anna. So there was a recent statement by a government official, and it kind of went unnoticed. I think it was a few weeks ago, where they said we are now regulating space-time. We have the ability to manipulate space-time. So I'll let that sink in for a moment. That was an official statement by a U.S. government representative. He can elaborate on that.
Well, there's certainly been publicly visible funding that has gone into that. And I'll say a couple things before I would say there's a much better expert in the audience, Dr. Julia Mossbridge, in terms of space-time work. Also, that's something that Dr. Hal Kutov with space-time metric engineering has been very active in. So but plenty of work on that, and there's a lot that's going on.
So the backdrop of that, the National Science Foundation has been abundant.
Oh, and sorry, just one quick thing to say. But by the way, we also, a few of us were also, maybe several of us in the room, about over a year ago, were on the National Mall at the National Academy of Sciences, where it was National Space Week. And there were some presenters from around the world, and that also included a representative from the Chinese government, presumably CCP. And the presentation that they were putting up included requests for, we want to work with people on, I believe it was space-time metric engineering, it was gravitational control, and it was also alien life on planet, amongst other things like renewables. So the Chinese are literally coming down to the National Mall and saying, hi, come talk to us about this. You know, and so, come on, seriously? Another thing that they said, by the way, you know, in terms of many of us have been advocating for much higher levels of capital to go into innovation and also into in-space infrastructure, which does not have access to the terrestrial financial tools like debt. Yes, if you buy a house, most people, they're making a smaller down payment, 20%, 5%, whatever they could do, more of a minimum. In space, it's typically you've got to front all of the money up front. You're not going to build a hospital for the individual patient. You need to have the financial model. So anyways, when I was trying to figure out what was the space budget for China, they wouldn't tell me. But the gentleman did look at me in disdain. You know, he's talking to all of you. He said, when we look at putting up a space station, we view that, does that cost the same amount of money as putting down a couple kilometers of metro? Basically, we're going to do that all day, every day. So if we can't figure out how to make the investments to win in these transformational markets for abundance, for societal benefits, and for economic growth and gain, we're going to be left behind. So so the people that are moving forward. We really hope that the U.S. government, Fortune 1, is able to share some of the great work that's been done, previously across all these fields, but the private sector is moving forward.
Folks, we're going to have time for only two very quick questions. We're already way over our time, and we have to, unfortunately, surrender this room back over to folks. So let me finish. I've got two here, and then afterward that you want to get with our guests, you can. We're not going to have time to open it up right now for public questions. Let me get to this real quick. And if we could, our guests could please keep the answer as succinct as possible before we actually get tethered from. Let me start with you, Ann. The National Science Foundation has been a fundamental pillar of some of America's revolutionary technology and concepts for many decades. How can the NSF help the government now concerning the topic of UAPs?
Well, I guess one of the things that's just publicly visible is that we have been, when I was formerly at NSF, I would just say that there's lots of publicly visible content of us being very forward on the topic, listening to innovators, working with strong colleagues from across the interagency. So I think that NSF has shown, and NSF leadership has also just been extremely supportive. So I just want to be very clear. I left the government because I'm excited about building things in the private sector, and I only ever received the greatest support and collaboration from my interagency colleagues and from the agencies with which I worked, who are extremely forward on all areas of innovation, but certainly UAP fits within that, including our publicly visible awards that were made to fund UAP science. There's great people that are highly supportive, particularly open ed.
That's very encouraging. Thank you. Mike, last question.
You were on the NASA UAP independent study team. My question for you is, what were the recommendations of the NASA UAP independent study team, and how should those recommendations be implemented?
For the purpose of time limitation of that question, I'll focus on two of those recommendations. We already discussed going to the NASA archives with an AI ML system to get the data just a few examples of which we were able to show today, again, which could be quite extraordinary. Candidly, at their companies, and we even volunteer to do that work for NASA. But the second one, and I really appreciate you showing that photo, which was taken by a commercial pilot. And one of the great disappointments I had when I was on the UAP study team was I was asking the FAA, how many reports have you gotten for Burchett files? Are those reports being archived? How are we keeping track of that? And I got confusion and no straight answers. And here I'd like to give credit to Ryan Gracie again for suggesting that we leverage NASA's Aviation Safety Recurring System, ASRS, which has been operating for decades, has hundreds of thousands of cases. And this is a confidential system where pilots, crew can call in about safety anomalies that they've experienced. It's worked phenomenally well. We should be leveraging this system for the reporting of the UAP. It can be done quickly, it can be done efficiently, and the amount of data that we will receive would be amazing. Additionally, the images that I showed you was from DUGAPS, the Commercial Neo Payload Service Program. Public-private partnerships have driven all of this. I'm so excited for the democratization of space and the data that we will get from that. This was just one example today. As SpaceX, Blue Origin, Redwire, other companies move forward, all with their own cameras, all with their own systems, we're going to get a lot more data. But NASA still holds on to a lot of it. So, for example, with what I presented, we need the raw data. We need timestamps. We need data in a format where we can do true epidemic research. So if we were just to do those two things, and again, they should do support from Congress, I think, to push that, I think NASA will play a tremendously important role, and particularly the aviation community and the commercial space community. The amount of data we get, I think, will completely shift the level of sophistication on this topic.
I think there's also probably the 20 or 30 hours of some of that forward interagency content in Space Disruptors Day and the Ecosystemic Futures podcast, which we have Diane in the room here today. So thank you, Diane, for helping get that information on broadly.
I do have to say, though, I'm a little less optimistic than Anna relative to adoption in government. As I said during my testimony, that particularly academic members of the NASA UAP independent study team were threatened, outright threatened, not for saying UAP are real, but for just having the temerity of even reviewing the topic. You can't teach science in that environment. And part of the reason that I'm calling for Congress to help is there's still a great deal of skepticism, even just at NASA, and careers that get ended just for having, again, the temerity of the research board. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to push for real science, objective science, overcome that stigma. Let's get to the data, because our economy and our national security may be depending on it.
And I think you contributed so much. So what I would say is some of the things that you experience, or that Lou, and Chris and others experience, there's that body of having been able to point to those leaders. So we had the advantage of being able to point to your study, into this prior work. So, and again, I think there's the opportunity for the government, but I would say that it's not, there are industries that move forward that are not forwarded by the government. But I think just to be something very important that came out, and sometimes if we say, oh, UAP this, UAP that, there's going to be some great technologies that come out of that. That is very fluffy, and who cares? So I think something that I got freaked on in an unclassified, just informal, no classification level environment, and both in personal capacity, but then I later brought that person in to brief others in the agency, is there are real and meaningful technologies that have come from these programs. And I think with a lot of this information, you're going to see that, the story about it has been in the internet for decades, perhaps. So what I have, though, on from a very credible source was that, yes, there are people who say that this came out of the UAP programs when we talk about lasers and semiconductors. And that was so important. Semiconductors, the top 10 companies today, a $6.5 trillion industry that we all benefit from and underpins our global economy. That is something that it's not just, oh, maybe we'll get something. It's that there are tremendous people who have built things, both in classified and unclassified environments. And that's been, put out by so many authors and people in the news. But some are in environments that we can say this is taken seriously. And those people have told the government that, yes, there's been real advantage on some of these most important core technologies are coming from crash retrieval.
And I think to get the government to take it seriously, we need to engage the public. We got to get outside the UAP bubble. And Damp Air is a tremendous movie, Age of Disclosure. It's really a blue story in many ways. That's extraordinary. Himself and Jay Stratton. If we can touch the public, if we can get them engaged, we can get them the same information that we just saw, I think that would be completely transformed.
Well, since time is of the essence, first of all, thank you sincerely for your participation. It was fantastic conversation. Let me leave a couple thoughts here, if I may, before we say final farewell. One of the recommendations we made to Congress is the generation of a national intelligence strategy that would be promulgated on an annual basis, just like we do for other our targets. It's a system that we perfected already. And then right on the heels of that, a national strategy every year, annual strategy on UAP drone. Basically, any unattributed objects that are in our skies, we should have a strategy for it. We're seeing both on the combat field and even the streets of New York, we're seeing technologies that we can't really explain and frankly could be used against us in a very nefarious way if we don't get a handle on it. Two, what I'd like to do is propose, and hopefully Congress at some point will be open to this, that we should do a format just every year for the American public and for the media, and allow Congress to get to the bottom of things and ask the questions that they normally wouldn't be able to catch, and bring in the Department of Justice, the intelligence community, the Department of Defense, and do them all year. Why not? Right? Sitting down here in front of American people, but well, I look at it, you're paying their paychecks and boys, right? They kind of owe you some answers, and they will come for some answers. I would also say, please let your members of Congress know that you support this. If you like what Representative Burlison and Representative Luna and Burchett and others have done here today, let them know, right? They need to hear this. And so other members of Congress can see this and say, hey, that works, right? Tell them that. They need to hear that feedback, unless you don't want one of these again. But that would be my suggestion. Last, but on these, I want to thank specifically our members of Congress, because at the end of the day, they're your representatives. They represent this country. They are very much part of this country. And they are the reasons why you are all here today. We are here. They have facilitated this. They have sponsored this. They have gone out of their way to put their political careers, potentially Jeffrey Friedman, having this conversation for you. So if you appreciate this, let us know. And last but not least, thank you to every one of you. Again, our friends in the media, the folks that came over here, some cases came from across the world and traveled here very long distances to be with us here today. Thank you very much. It's very meaningful, and we are on a year that is spending with Bedford. So with that said, let's give a round of applause to our guests here, and a huge round of applause for Retro TV Project. We are after moderating our table status for, so with no further ado, this meeting is now